Alright, hello, welcome. My name is Jason Welsh, and today we're going to be looking at plating Loot Studio models. Okay? And not just Loot Studio models, but any models that have a lot of detail in them and how that works. So if you were ever interested in making miniatures into copper miniatures, well, this is the video for you, and we'll get started. Alright, today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at how to plate this in copper. Okay, so these models are available all over the place now. You can get subscriptions to 3D models for miniatures for gaming. They come in 32 and 75 millimeter. This one is from Loot Studio. If you get a subscription to them, you get all kinds of models every other month, and I'm going to show you how to plate one in copper. Okay, so you can plate smaller ones. It's just easier for me to demonstrate this one on a little bit larger scale. I feel that the larger ones are actually a little bit harder. I chose this one because it has a lot of issues that we're going to run into, and I can address what those issues are. And yeah, it's a pretty cool model. So it's got a little base and everything. Now the base is separate, so in certain areas like under here it'll be quite difficult to get that to plate because it's a shadowed area, we call it. So it's better to plate it lightly and then put it together and then give it a more thorough plate afterwards. At least that's in my humble opinion. So let's get started. We'll start addressing some of the issues that we're going to run into and how we're going to manage to get past that. I'll also know that there is many things in this video that like it might require some information that you need at firstdensitymaterial.com. As far as like taking classes in plating, I'm just going to show you how to plate this, but not like how to mix formula or any of that other stuff. I'm just showing you the general setup needed for this. You will have to have additional information on how to make fluids and what equipment you're going to need in order to do this, but this will get you started and get you motivated into learning how to plate things. Alright, so let's first take a look at this model, and I can address some of the issues that are going to happen with it. It's got a lot of points. It's got these horns, it's got these ears, it's got like these little points right here. And whenever you have a point when you're going to plate, what happens, this is going to be a cathode, and it's going to shoot electricity to the anode. Okay, you're going to not see this electricity. It's going to happen in forks, and you don't see it at all. But because the electricity flows out from the model to the anode, those points will build up the most copper and the most texture also. We don't want that with this. Okay, when we do plate, sometimes we like this texture, but in this case I want to preserve more of the detail on this model than what I do when I electroform. You can use an electroforming solution to do this. I primarily use a plating solution, but I got like a little bit of a higher acid electroforming bath that I can run this on. Okay, so electroforming solution will work quite nicely, but we will have to develop something in order to keep the texture off these points. What we're going to be making is a robber's wheel. There's a few other names for it, but I just like robber's wheel, so I'm just going to stick with it. It's basically a big giant copper ring that connects to the model, and it takes some of the heat away from those points by sending the electricity out through the robber's wheel rather than the points themselves. Cool. You can kind of think of it as a Faraday's cage, but it's kind of backwards thinking, because a Faraday's cage would actually, it would be around the anode if that was the case for a Faraday's cage. So this one works a little backwards to that. Alright, so we start out with a big piece of copper wire, okay, rather thick if you can, doesn't have to be too thick, and my tank is only so big, so what I want to do is kind of make this like that, okay, so I can quite easily just go like this, and remember, it's all about those points, right? So in this case, what's going to collect the most current are these 2 points right here. But that means it's going to take away from here, so the copper won't build up so fast. So I want to put these points like where the most points are, and I feel that it's going to be the horns and tips that are going to be affected the most, because when we go to put it in the solution, we'll put it like this, and the anode will be over here, so it will definitely draw electricity. So that's what we want right there. Alright, not necessary but very valuable. These are in your local grocery store. You can find them. They hold soap and they're made out of silicone. Okay, what's really nice about these, I can set this on here, and when I go to paint it, it doesn't pick up too much texture. So it's really nice as a drying rack. Invaluable, really. What we're going to be mixing is a high concentration of speedball ink. Okay, we want the India ink, and we're going to be using some kind of graphite. Now, graphite powder comes in many different brands. I'm going to show you how to test it too, but I'm just using my General's graphite. I bought quite a bit of stock in this when it was still available, and so I still have a lot of this left. So we're going to use General's graphite. Again, it comes, there's on Amazon, there's a whole bunch of different graphites. They're not all the same, but I'll show you how to test it very easily using glass. Okay, so to mix that, I actually got to mix some because I'm running out. You can use any kind of scoop whatsoever. I really like using this mirror. You need a sealed bottle. And I oversaturate the graphite quite a bit. So how do you know when you have enough? It'll almost be a solid ball. Again, it's all about testing it too. Okay, so it's filled up to about right here with graphite powder. There's also a marble in the bottom of this. Make sure I put this on quite tight. There we go. And Now we have our mixture. Okay, so how do we test this? We put a strip of this solution while it's mixed up on glass. And then we just let it dry. And we do that every time we make a new batch. We do that. If you want to speed up the drying, you can use a hairdryer on low. Then I would let it cool down because the hot graphite will actually give you really bad results. So we're doing a couple tests here. One is toughness. Okay, is it stuck to the glass? Yes. Okay. If you take steel wool and you go like this, can you shine it? Yes. See how it's shiny? And it's still stuck to the glass no matter if you try to scrub it off. Okay, so that's the toughness value of it. The other value that we're testing is the resistance value. So what we're going to do is take an ohm meter, turn it on, set it to ohms. You can see the little horseshoe. Turn the horseshoe on. You can see the little horseshoe in the corner. This one's really nice. It's SparkFun 70C. I don't know if they make these anymore, but I love this meter. It has this little bar right here, so the more bar that we have going across, the higher the resistance value, and therefore the better resistance we get, the more it's going to plate, or faster it's going to plate. Okay, so what I'm doing is just taking the two leads for this multimeter, and I'm just touching them. That's pretty good. I can get a little higher. This is in the 2K range, so roughly I want kind of that bar to be from here to here. So what I would do is mix a little bit more graphite to it. $3K, not bad. And it's in centimeters. Generally we measure this stuff like how much resistance per centimeter. So if you hold the two leads 1 centimeter apart and kind of keep that as a measurement. So all the way around here it's always about 1.8 to 2.7 K. So I'm just going to put a little bit more graphite in there, mix it up, and do another test. Alright, so here's the new batch, just kind of showing you. There we go. It doesn't matter how many spots you get of this, but sometimes, yeah, see how you got 500 ohms? That's really good. Okay, so. Anywhere between 2 to 500 ohms is really good. Alright, so there's the new batch. Good. It does pass the toughness test too. I can't scrape it off. It does shine quite well. I can take some steel wool and go like this, and it shines up really well. Very neat. You can also use the light. Can you see light through it? So always use glass. And you can recycle it just to scrub it off, or throw it in acetone. It should come off. Alright, so now that we have our conductive fluid all mixed, we can now paint the model. I use this long sable type of brush for this because it gets down in there. I'm just going to clean up my workflow here before I go painting. Alright, so always be shaken. Okay, always be mixing this up. You are going to get dirty. You can wear gloves. I used to think that the oils from your skin kind of got onto the model and made it so this stuff doesn't stick, but that's not true. So I'm just going to start working it in and start painting it all black. Try to keep as much detail as you can, so you don't want to get too much into cracks and crevices. Again, the longer the sable of the brush, it's so much easier to try to get it out of the detail if it gets some of it trapped in the detail, and you can get really far into these areas. You want it kind of thick on the model, but you don't want it to take up any of the detail either. Alright, so this is the boring part. I'm just going to coat this in conductive fluid, and I probably won't be able to hold it anymore, so I'm going to have to let it dry, and then I'll do the other half of it. So after you sit it on the silicone to dry, you can see that it's kind of stuck to the silicone just a little bit, which makes it super handy, because now if you want to do the rest of the model, you just go ahead and paint it, and it's kind of stuck there. And if it has any textures on the bottom, we just pretty much sand those off. It's going to get attached to the base anyway. It still will fall over, so you just got to be careful. Alright, so for the next step, you need extension cord. You know, those white or brown extension cords, and they come in where they have two. In fact, here's one that's holding my camera. That type of extension cord right there. Boom. So what you do, you separate it, and then you strip it. Okay. And this is some really good wire, because it's not coated, it's very thin, so this is just a lamp or extension cord. Okay. So what you want to do is pull off several strands of it. Just put the strands off to the side. And keep continuing to do that and build up a nice little pile, because you're going to need it to attach it to the robber's wheel. Alright, so what you do is you find key points, and it doesn't matter which points those are, but just any points that connect, and you can connect them to this robber's wheel. And you're going to leave kind of like a longer tail. Boom. You just wrap it so you'll end up making a loop, and then wrapping it around the bar, and then leaving a tail. And you do that over and over and over again until it can float. And you can kind of see where I might want one more here, maybe. So I'm going to connect maybe one more here and just kind of leave it at that for right now. So now that you have all these leads, you basically just bring them all together, just like that, and you twist it. And you try to get it so, you know, it's nice and level. It's still, if I hold it like that, you can kind of see it's sort of even, but it doesn't really matter too much. And then you just kind of go like that. And boom, we have all these connections that connect to the robber's wheel. And I can now look at the model and see that I might have a little bit of touch up. So it's really easy to touch it up now that it's dangling, but don't touch up areas and get the paint on these, because we want to remove these wires eventually so they're not visible. But if you put the conductive fluid over these and connect it to the model, it's a lot harder. Alright, so this is an electroforming tank. It has a little bit more acid in it, so in or at firstdensitymaterial.com, there's classes on how to build tanks and check acid levels and mix the electroforming solution and just everything. So this video is just how to plate this little character, but it's much more involved than just plating a little character. You would have to build a tank, you would have to have a mixed solution and everything else. So let me explain why pH is a pretty important thing when it comes down to these things, is because when you have a higher pH, it gets into the nooks and crannies of these and leaves a little less shadowy areas. Shadowy areas is anything, pretend this is the sun and it always shines onto the piece, this right here, okay? If it's in a direction where it can shine, that's good, but with the pH, it allows you to get around corners and up in those nooks and crannies, making the shadow areas a little easier to plate. Okay, so it just has a 0.8 pH in this tank. Alright, sweet. So take your little character, everything's shut off too, very important. So you just go like that, and if it floats, which it is starting to float, stupid thing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just go like this and attach it to the bar. It's going to float still. Just like that. And what I have is these little hooks. Okay, this is you can use a quartz crystal or glass or whatever. And this is a piece of plastic, PLA plastic. And you can see it's just wire wrapped here. There's no connection between here and here because of this plastic. And what this plastic does is allows me to attach it to the robber's wheel. And it just drops it down. Just like that. Now if it's uneven, which it is, I could put one on the other side too. So I'm going to go get another one and attach it to the other side. Alright, there we go. Perfect. And it's just dangling in that tank and it's nice and level. Again, it doesn't have to be level, but it would be nice. Alright, so I'm just going to crank this up. With the robber's wheel, you can actually make the amperage quite high. I would probably recommend a piece this size to have starting at like 0.8 amps. So for those people that are new, this is the power source. Okay. So you can see I can set the voltage, and I'm just cranking up the voltage. Okay. And then what I want to do is then the amps right here, I could start that out at like 0.8 amps. Okay, and then I'm just going to turn on the power and then just let it build up a plate. So what I'm looking for is a really light plate. It does not have to be thick at all. I'm just looking to get rid of all the graphite and replace it with copper for this initial coat. Alright, so it's been about 4 hours. You can see there's significant growth on both sides. It gives you the idea of like how long it's going to take, because what you don't want to do is overgrow the piece. You still have to attach it to the base. So I'm okay leaving this overnight the way it's growing, but as soon as I get up in the morning, I'm definitely going to have to check it and probably pull it out. So yeah, looks like it's growing quite well. Another thing, you don't want to pull it out of the liquid a bunch of times. In fact, it's best just to leave it alone, look at it through the liquid, and that's it. So alright, at this point you only have a little bit left and it's not worth it, so I'm going to take it out because these shadow areas right here might need to be directed towards the anode. You see the black in those little tiny areas, so it's either A, didn't get covered very well with the brush, or it needs to be now directed this way. You can kind of see a little bit of buildup on those little horns too. I don't want those to get too thick. Alright, so you take it out of the solution. You first want to like loosen these wires, see how they're like, if they're connected, you want to make sure that you go like this and kind of bounce them around a little bit so they do not connect to the model. Such a thin plate, it should easily bounce around. So these shadow areas right here is what I was talking about earlier, and those are the ones that need touching up. And we need to put it in a direction like this back into the solution. So one of the things that I use for like heavy shadow areas is a safer solution. This is a conductive paint that's water-based. It works really well with these areas for some reason. You can use the graphite combination, that does work too, but I'm going to be using safer solution. You can also see things that are addressed, like these areas right here where I didn't get any coverage whatsoever, so I missed. So this is the time where you got to pull it out, kind of look at it and see which areas you're going to be missing and kind of fix those up. When you're using safer solutions, I highly recommend putting it into a nail polish bottle that has an acrylic brush and a ball at the bottom so you can shake it. Never use it out of the larger container. It's a rather expensive paint. It's well worth it for weird areas and like crystals that are glass or anything like that where you can see the back side of things. I do use the same sable brush out of this bottle. So if it gets contaminated because of the brush, it's going to get contaminated in this little bottle rather than contaminate the whole thing, because it does have copper in it. Copper does patina, and if that's the case, you can get all kinds of stuff like chloride in it from the water, anything that you rinse out your brush with. So this is a really easy process of just touching up those areas. Again, this model is the worst case scenario that you're going to come up against because it has so many shadow areas. It has all this wing area in here, all this, and all this in here. That's why I chose it as demo. I knew what I was getting into. So, long story short, you might not even need a safer solution for most models. Also, you can see the backside where the robber's cage was not. Like on the tips of these, you can see there's more of a deposit of copper, and that's what happens. So you could make a double robber's cage. It's kind of like a sphere, and a sphere the other way too. robber's wheel, robber's cage. Cool. Alright, so that's pretty much it. I'm just going to touch up these areas with this paint. I'm going to let it dry for a few hours. And then I'm going to redirect the angle of which I'm going to be putting it in. I'll show that on a video. Meanwhile that is drying, I'm going to attack the base. There's not really anything significant about this base. I am going to add a little bit of a decoration to it. I'm going to add a copper wire, and going in the back of it, this is where I'm going to end up trimming it in the end, and this is just to dangle it into the solution. Now I was thinking just several ways to do this, but I think this is probably the best for this model. Other models have something to, grab onto. I could attach it to the skull, but I feel that might get in the way. So I'm going to end up putting the wire on before and then paint it this time to add to, like the connection of it. Just like that. Dingle. Alright, and another thing is I would not print these hollow. Okay? You can, but I would highly recommend not doing it. Just for the fact that it's going to float, it's going to be kind of a pain. You could add the wire here and then add another wire here with a loop to attach the weight to it, but it's just so much easier if you were to print it solid, or at least with an infill. So there is an option to print hollow with infill. That is another thing that you could do. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this one up in a little production area, and then get it thrown into the solution and get it started. Alright, so I decided to take this in a little bit different direction. I plated out the base. I haven't restored any of the shadowed areas. I'm going to add the base first because this has a sufficient amount of copper. This one does too. Graphite's all gone except for those areas, and I don't want it to build up too thick. So I'm going to attach the base, take all the wires off. First let me take all the wires off, and then I'll show you how to attach the base. Alright, so how do you fuse two pieces of metal together? Well, you use super glue, and then you plate over the top of the super glue. So no big deal here. We just super glue the character to the base. I use Insecure for that, and you're just adding that to the very bottom of the flat spots. And then we'll end up painting some of that gold paint, which is a name I can't remember right now. It is Safer Solutions. Yeah, that's it. Safer Solutions. Alright, so we want to do this all in one thing so we don't get a whole bunch of super glue everywhere else. So I'm just going to place it down. And once dry, we'll end up adding some of that paint to it. Alright, so with the glue dry, you're essentially going to be using this paint, the Safer Solution paint, as a gap filler in any area that you use the glue. And that way it makes a bond with the two surfaces. So I'm just going to goop some of that on, and try to get it into all the cracks and crevices. So essentially it looks like that. Now, because that's so thick, you gotta really let that dry. And try to smooth it out just a little bit somewhere so you don't get texture. There we go. Cool. Alright, now that the figure is completely dry, it's time to put her back in her little wheel with her base. And we're going to try to direct as much current to these areas as possible by making the most connections to those as possible. So what we want to do is look for things that we can attach the wires to around her feet, by her base. Okay, and then these points again on the wheel, just to take heat off of those areas. Alright, so back in the little wheel it goes. Now another thing is, this is a really wide model. You can see the wide, and it's got those points on the back. Again, it would stand to reason that you could do a double wheel on characters like this, where there's a sphere going the other way too. It's a pretty interesting build. It does take quite a while. Not really necessary, but it is fun to build. Alright, so there's what kind of like a mid-grade of it looks like. So what happens is I put a wire here. Here's all these points, right? So here's another wire that attaches to the cage. And I added this little thing right here, kind of like a barbed wire. These are the 2 points that the current will be attracted to. So it'll take and distribute more copper here evenly. This will pick up a lot of copper, but the even amount of copper will get distributed here because of that. Because of these horns right here and these points right here, these exist. And I don't see any other areas that I need to add any more points to, but there is some, there's some natural things that I'm just going to leave here, right here. So that's the name of the game, is try to establish some points where current is being directed towards the anode. These areas are going to build up copper, and then leave all these other areas to distribute it nice and evenly. You might see some weird growth on these points. Alright, well, she is ready now to be put in a different tank, because my other tank is being taken up, and the other tank that I have is a low acid formula with just a lot of brightener. Okay, so if you take any classes, I teach you about brightener and low acid formulas and all that good stuff, but that tank will be really good for, I think, this character, now that I have the base of the copper put up. So if you're new to this, I do have 4 tanks. One at the very end is the high acid formula for just a lot of detail, and a flash of copper onto the surface to get rid of the graphite. And then this one is for buildup. It's a low acid formula with high levels of brightener, which has got this stuff right here. And that allows it to very quickly build up a surface. The detail won't be as good, but the detail's already established on the flash that I did on the other tank. You don't need 2 tanks. This is just kind of a flex thing, but it does help. It really does sometimes. You don't need them this size either. This is only to do those really large characters. If you're interested in like doing the 75mm characters, you're probably going to need at least a 3 to 4 gallon tank. But you could quickly learn it just by doing the small 32 millimeter characters in like a 3,000 milliliter tank that I show how to build in a video on firstdensitymaterial.com. Alright, so when I'm adding it to the formula this time, I'm just going to use it like in this direction. That way I can kind of rotate the model as needed. Always make sure that your power is off before adding anything, because it really screws up the surface. And this time it doesn't float, which is great. You definitely kind of want to keep the anode away from the model too. We want to keep the model a sufficient distance from the anode. This will help get a nice even coat. For smaller things with more detail, for more texture, you can add it next to the anode, but for this I don't want any texture whatsoever. So before I add any kind of current, I'll add the brightener. I'll kind of put that in the area where the object is. I don't really stir it. And then I'll set the amperage to be 0.1 amps per square inch. So this is a pretty big model. I'm going to go probably 3 amps at least, if not higher, but it's going to be 50 volts at 3 amps. Alright, so that's going to sit in the tank for quite some time. Always make sure that you have enough anode by pushing it down. And good to go. So I'll check back on her probably in an hour. See how she's turning out. Alright, so it's very shiny. I turned the power off, I pulled it out, and I only put it in halfway. And what I'm going to do is only plate the bottom half of it just a little bit. So I hung it by this hook. You see? It's only halfway in the solution. And then I attached the wire to this rod. And that'll make it so it builds up copper on the base a little bit more where that glue connection was. I also had to turn it down to 2 amps 50 volts. I had all the way up to 50 volts 5 amps when it was all the way into the solution. Obviously, since it's half the model in there, I turned it down to half the amperage. It'll never get completely shiny. I don't have enough amps for that, but it will be easy to shine up. It's a nice smooth coat on the surface, so that's what a Dremel is for, to do the polishing of it. So for right now, I'm just going to let that build up on the base a little bit more, and then we'll pull it out and we can do a little shine on it. Alright, so every once in a while you want to just kind of like raise it up or lower it down. And then what this does is it blends the copper layers together. There you go. So pick a new spot, let it go a little bit longer, come back about 30 minutes and just kind of like nudge it a little bit, and that'll blend those two edges together. So you can plate the bottom and top differently, and you can blend it. Nobody would ever know that one has like a few microns of copper a little bit more than the other this way. Alright, it looks good. I think I am done with this. We are going to pull it out. Make sure that I am turning. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. So you can definitely see there's quite a buildup around this shoe, around there, around those areas. So that means that bond is there. Good. You can see how thick these wires are. See how thick they are? So that means there's a significant amount of copper buildup. Alright, I'm going to rinse it off. Alright, before we start getting into removing it from its wheel, I'm just going to do some tests in these areas. I'm going to be using a rotary tool. Doesn't matter what rotary tool you use. As far as like what model, I'm using a Fordham SR, but I'm just using one of these brushes. And what I'm doing is kind of testing the plate for strength in those shadow areas. Find an area, there we go, where I can be in the camera and do this. Alright, beautiful. Okay, cool. So there was some water. It hasn't dried yet all the way. So gotta get that dry before I can do this test. Alright, so we have sufficient amount of plate. It's dry now. My wheel looks like it's doing a really good job. Sweet. So the only thing that we have to do is we can free it and then shine it, or shine it while it's in this thing. I'm going to start cutting some of these wires. No matter how careful you are, you're always going to have these wires bond to the model. But if you get diamond wheels, okay, we can like at least shave them down a little bit and shape them so nobody can really tell. So some love is going to have to be put into the grinding some of these down. Unfortunately, no matter how careful you are, it happens. Boom. She is beautiful. Alright. Alright, now the pain part. The painful part is to go in with a Dremel and polish her up. So there's many ways to do this. I mean, with a model like this, it's got so much detail in it. You can use some chemicals to do it. I do have videos for free on YouTube to show you different ways to polish a model without like using a Dremel too much. But lately, I've been kind of lazy and just using a Dremel or a Fordham. It's no big deal. You could use some chemicals on it. This one is rather intense. I couldn't do an electro polish on it because of all these areas again. I would need a lot of amperage in order to electro polish this. So I'm just going to painstakingly go in and use a wire brush, Fordham, and I do have these. So if you buy these wire brushes, they kind of start out like this, but if you take and put them up against a file, okay, so take a file, go like that inside, chuck it up, take your file, and then start it up, and you'll see that it makes a point, okay? So they start out like this, they're kind of bushy, and then because of the file, that's what they look like. So these are perfect to get into those really tight areas. You don't want to take out all the texture either. You don't want perfectly polished because you want something for the patina to grab onto, especially for those back areas, you only want the really highlighted stuff to be polished. Alright, so here we go. I'm not going to show too much of this on video because it is rather boring to watch. I'm just going to be using those and these. Make sure you're wearing eye protection, of course. These will bring death to anybody. They are horrible. They spit these little things out and they will stick in you. They do hurt. Cool. I'll show you when I'm done. Alright, so after I shined everything, I then soak it in a primer. I call it a primer. It's not really a primer. It's something to lower the pH of the copper. So I use Zep Industrial Purple Degreaser. This is just sodium hydroxide at a really weak level. But what it'll do, it'll prime the surface for some really good patina. So lowering the copper, kind of, if I could describe the surface of copper, it looks like little mirrors in different directions, right? So when we patina it, it will make these mirrors shine in different directions, and whatever direction it is, whatever reflects the light, it makes it either darker or reflect on colors. But when you lower the pH of the copper surface, it brings all the mirrors into the same angle, if I could describe it that way. And then by putting the liver sulfur over the top of that, you get a much more even distribution of patina. Alright, so I'm going to patina this using liver sulfur, and I do have a formula for liver sulfur on YouTube. Just type in LOS Jason Welsh, and I show you how I make it. It's kind of dangerous to make. I would highly just buying it, but the stuff I use is rather strong. I have to, and it's inexpensive to make too. So, alright, so here's with the patina on. Now I'm going to hit it with a hair dryer. If you ever have a hard time patining something, especially with harder copper, you can hit it with a hair dryer or heat it up with water or something like that, and it'll bake that patina right in, and then we can scrub off the highlights after we're done. Alright, you can see that turned it like this really sweet old gunmetal like patina, and it's got some copper showing through, so it looks really old. Look at that. Now I'm going to let it fully dry. It's got some cracks and crevices in here that are kind of wet, and then I'm going to go over it to polish up some of the highlights. But I'm only going to bring out some of the highlights that I really want people to see. Other than that, I really like the old look of this. Alright, so this takes the longest to do, and you don't have to do it everywhere, but what happens is you just take the finest steel wool you can find, extra fine steel wool, and you just go over the model. There's no hack for this, and you only bring out what you want to see. Okay, so you don't have to bring out everything. In fact, I don't really like that look. It's best just to scrape it across and let whatever that's the highest come into focus. Take your time. See that hair? Yeah, it's beautiful. Alright. Still a little wet. So I'm going to do this a little bit and I'll show you the results afterwards. You might not be able to even see them on video, so I'll probably have to do some really cool, maybe a photo of it. You can. You can also use the little, this thing, as a burnisher, but again, if you don't do it careful enough, what will happen is you'll bring out something that's not supposed to be, and it doesn't look as good. Okay, so it's best just to maybe take a smaller piece and just kind of wedge it in there, rather than, definitely do not mechanically move or remove this stuff. It does look bad then. Use the steel wool, not a rotary tool. Alright, there's the final patina and plate. I used one of these makeup brushes to get rid of any of the steel wool. And it will darken up, and then I could later on polish it again. Let the patina kind of like settle in for a few days, then bring out the highlights again. So, very sweet, very old looking. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that inspires you to like try this out. Getting into plating, getting into electroforming is very, very fun as a hobby. It's kind of expensive. Again, hopefully some of my classes will kind of like cut down on those costs though, you know, like that way you're not buying the wrong stuff. And I just really try to capture different people's hobbies into my hobby. I really like, you know, like I had a sculpting community, and I showed them how to do this, and then it started to bridge into jewelry, and then it started to bridge into a few other places, and now I'm looking at 3D printing and how that is changing things. So I'm trying to show larger communities how to do this so they can incorporate it into their hobby. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a good one, and until next time.